couple of quick opening remarks, and then we're going to sort of begin to move through some of what we have on our agenda. Obviously, some parts are going to be a little more interesting than some of the boilerplate stuff, but we're going to go ahead and get started on some of that. Let's see, I was going to say, Jonathan, why don't we just go ahead and start in with some of the quick changes that are made to our operating agreement or bylaws, and if you can take us through that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I believe it was provided to board members this morning. If it would be easy, I can share my screen so folks can see that this morning. Let's see. All right. Can everybody see that I have the bylaws up there on your screen?
Yep,
All right.
I got them.
And here you go, y'all. This is what I'm looking at. And so on the first amendment, just as a housekeeping matter on page 2, section 5, I went ahead and made that change to reflect the new statutory change concerning who may serve as the chair of the board. And so you'll see that I've reflected that there. And that was just a lift from the new session law to bring that in conformance. And if everyone's okay, I can take that space out and move a little further down here. This was the provision that y'all asked me to take a look at concerning designees or who may be representing ex officio members. And so I tried to do this as simply as possible, folks. It previously said that ex officio or a designee representing ex officio board member may participate in discussion, but shall not have a vote. And I just changed that to and shall vote on issues that come before the strategy board. If that looks good to everybody, we can move on. That is also the only change. So I think that clears up the issue. Does anyone have any comments?
Jonathan, appreciate that. As I said, I appreciate you doing that in as few words as possible. And that looks pretty good. Do we need to vote on this?
I think that we do. And, last time we had to, I believe the tack that we took was to suspend the rules, the bylaws, so that we could, I believe that was because we lacked a quorum or something along those lines without the ex officio members. So I believe we have enough folks to vote, except as long as ex officio members don't vote on this adoption, and then moving forward, they'll be able to vote. If that makes sense for everyone, I think all we need is a motion to vote, and we're good to go.
Well, if
This
no
is
one else.
Tracy, so moved.
Okay. We have a second?
Second.
That.
So I'll ask the question. All those in favor of amending the bylaws, please say aye.
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 More
Aye.
importantly, do I have anyone against amending the bylaws? So I believe the motion carries. Moving forward, all designees will have full voting participation on the board, and the bylaws are amended.
Rocco, if I might suggest, can we let the record show that it was unanimously approved?
Agreed.
Thank you, sir. I will stop sharing my screen, and I think my portion of the show is concluded. Thanks, folks.
Jonathan, thanks for your help on that this morning. Joe, looks like according to our agenda, you are next up. Can you give us a bit of an update and go from there?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. The Digital Transformation Committee, we only had one meeting in January since the full board last met. We spent most of the meeting in January hearing from DEQ about their permit process technology. They undertook a permitting transformation program with the goal of streamlining the process, modernizing and creating publicly accessible data. In addition, they prioritized simplifying payments and having transparent communications. They discussed the components of their data platform modernization, which allows for solutions to be tailored for each DEQ unit. We also got updates about other progress in the January meeting. Digital Identity Working Group, chatbot and accessibility, the pay it function, some funding updates, and then the annual report. So on the Digital Identity Working Group, the goal of that group was to create a common digital identity platform to securely access state government services. This is a cross-agency working group, and they're having discussions with other agencies. They're working on a strategy and roadmap going forward for digital identity. So that was very interesting. Also got an update on chatbot. The DIT statewide IT procurement implemented a chatbot in late February. Next up will be NC Government Accessibility and Site Performance Capability Solution completed for all sites on the Digital Common platforms, which is over 60 sites. We got an update on Pay It, which is currently being used in 4 counties, and they're in discussions with other counties to add more. Progress is being made to move the MyDMV portal to the Pay It platform. They're waiting for identity proofing to be completed. In terms of funding, no additional funding was received, and DIT is considering the submission of an expansion budget request. And then lastly, Sarah Porper did a terrific job on the ITSB annual report, and she sent out a draft to gather committee feedback before publishing that. And that's about all the updates we have.
That seems like quite a list. I appreciate the hard work on all of that. I'm going to plant a seed right now. I don't know that we'll go into full discussion on this, but Joe, as we had discussed, and as we've mentioned with a number of folks, I would be interested in augmenting Digital Transformation Committee's sort of role, responsibility, and purview. And toward that objective, maybe rebranding, renaming it the Digital Innovation and Transformation. And honestly, I'm not sure that we shouldn't work something related to generative AI into that as well, so that I envision that we will have generative AI actually be part of both the cybersecurity subcommittee as well as your subcommittee. At this point, a little bit off the schedule here, but I'd like to open this topic up for a little conversation here, just to see how committee members feel about this. Obviously, generative AI is going to have profound impact, both positive and negative, on how business and life is conducted, not only here, but obviously around the world and the globe. But Joe, you and I had spoken about this a week or two ago. You had any thoughts on that since we spoke?
No new thoughts, Rocco, but I'll just say for the group, I am incredibly supportive of the idea. I was telling Rocco I was kind of embarrassed we hadn't thought about wrapping Gen AI into the scope of the group before now. It's coming hard and fast everywhere. Not only, homegrown solutions, but it's being embedded in commercial solutions very rapidly. So I do think it's important to include that in the scope. Be interested to know what others think, but I think it sounds like a wonderful idea.
I'd like to open it up to the floor. Anyone have a comment about this? Anyone have some angst with doing this, or everybody in general agreement? Jim, we've seen you pop up.
Yeah.
What's
Sorry,
your-
I'm actually sitting out here at Redmond on the Microsoft campus. So just a couple comments. I don't want to see AI start getting split across multiple committees, Rocco. It's got to be at one place. So I know the cyber group is looking at stuff. I'm also concerned because we don't have the resources to support multiple work streams, if you can appreciate what I'm saying there. We are, in fact, focused on generative AI as an agency. It is part of the framework, especially publicly available generative AI that Cherie and the team have been working on.
Mhm.
We have identified use cases already, and we already have an approved generative AI opportunity in working with DEQ for an initiative they're doing with some replatforming of an old ASCII text-based file to bring it up to more modern standards. So I just want to make you aware of that. We are looking, our strategy is going to be focusing more on back office functionality. We are going to not necessarily look at generative AI opportunities that have profound North Carolinian impact. I don't think we're ready there yet. We want to take a more progressive approach of learning how to make use of the tool, performing some improvements in our back office functionality. Examples of that would be statewide IT as we continue with the intelligent automation efforts that are underway there, as well as looking at opportunities within our CFO's office as well. When we think about how invoicing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, those types of things are occurring, and the amount of staff time that it takes to perform those functions. The purpose for that then would be if we would have a mess up, and I jokingly say mess up, it's not a profound impact. It is not exposing inadvertently North Carolinian data or any of that type of stuff. But again, it gets us some familiarity and the ability to use the tools that are available to us, and then able to move forward. To say generative AI is going to be a game changer is an understatement. There is a number of issues that still need to be resolved from a risk-based approach. One of the things I talked with Microsoft yesterday about is accessibility issues. As we start taking a look at how's the tool being utilized and being integrated across the various Microsoft platforms across the board, but it will be a game changer. So it's something we're going to have to figure out how to adopt, adapt, and enable its use here in the state.
Jim, I
Hey,
appreciate
Jim, for what it's worth, I think that's a really smart strategy. We're doing something similar, like using your internal productivity kinds of initiatives to learn and then have that experience help inform how you might use it in a way that's more public facing for constituents. So I think that's really smart.
And I'm going to say that the issues that generative AI presents is less technical. It's going to be more, there's going to be legal issues, ethical issues, things of that nature that as an IT organization, we can advise on, but we're not going to be the ones that has to decide on that. So I think we have a lot of work to do there. You know, the case in point would be, I'm a patient. I see Keith's on my screen. Keith's my doctor. Keith has never seen my symptoms. He leverages an AI tool to go do research, pull together a treatment plan. Does Keith have an ethical obligation as my doctor to tell me he did that? Do I have, as part of a patient bill of rights, the right to know that Keith is using AI to make that? That's not a technical issue. And so there are going to be some areas that are going to be well outside of our boundaries that I think we need to get addressed. And I think that's where the General Assembly is probably going to step in. I do know that there's a possibility of some legislation being crafted during the short session. Whether it goes anywhere, that's it. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but at least it'll marinate over into the next long session. So more to come on that, but that's kind of where we're at. Thanks, Rocco.
certainly. So, Joe, and I guess the other person I'd like to have weigh in on this is Keith in cybersecurity. If we were going to place this in one, in one of the subcommittees, or I guess in the alternative, if we were going to do yet another subcommittee, Joe, Keith, where do we feel like this belongs? I mean, obviously there's a great deal of concern both publicly and with users that are concerned about threat vectors that this represents. My concept on this was if we had both the cybersecurity side looking at this sort of from the threat potential and Joe, your group looking at it for its potential use, that we'd sort of get a little bit more of a balanced perspective than if we did one or the other. But here again, I'm open to some discussion on this.
So Rocco,
yeah.
This is Keith. So I think the thinking was that the cybersecurity group would look at it from a risk perspective, and then the other committee would look at it from more of an opportunity use case perspective.
Exactly.
So I'm really okay either way, but I think having that balance was a good approach personally.
Well, and here again, my thought on this would be that if we started out that way, and as this evolved, we felt like there was enough of this that we needed to actually spin off another committee, that would be an opportunity or potential downstream. But rather than just sort of diluting focus with what we have right now, that we would have both groups, look at it from their perspective and hopefully have somewhat of a balanced perspective rather than all weighted one side or the other. So,
Rocco, I may.
sure, yeah.
I guess my perspective is to keep it in context that our group as a board, we're not a decision-making body. And so there's a couple questions for IT does our board have a responsibility to pay attention to AI? Is it within our purview as far as IT? So is AI part of the IT responsibilities and functionality? And if so, then we probably have a responsibility to give it whatever is the proper level of attention and resources as we go forward. And I think, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned it's going to touch everything and be part. So I think my first reaction is that, yes, AI needs to be part of our focus within our purview to review, look at how it impacts strategy and IT within DIT as well as across other IT departments. It's just we're not going to be taking the lead to define things in IT, right? And I just wanted us to be clear. And if everybody has a different opinion, I'd appreciate hearing it.
Jeff, I think you're on point with that, and certainly, our name is strategy, and certainly generative AI is going to have to be considered as we look down the road. Obviously, as Secretary had said, there's going to be profound impacts with this, and so I think it would be negligent on our part if we did not integrate it in a number of ways with what we're looking at to help advise. So.
Hey, Rocco, this is Keith. If I may speak for a minute. So I'm pretty close to the work that the state is doing, especially the work that's coming into DIT around generative AI. That whether that's questions from agencies or work on the framework or the innovation side. My observation, whether it's one group, two groups, it is going to be, first of all, I completely agree that we need to start looking at it. So I think your recommendation with Joe and Keith, I'm very supportive of that. But I think whatever direction we go in, the conversation has to be in sync and collective. The subcommittees meet on a periodic cycle. The larger strategy board meets on a periodic cycle. And I think what we're going to start seeing, especially, I'm already seeing it from my day job, that we're going to see a lot of transformation happen very quickly. Some of it will have guidance and some of it will probably go in without guidance. And I think the nature of the subject really does require a sync between whatever subcommittees are working on, or even the consideration of a common new subcommittee. I think it's going to be that big.
Keith, I agree wholeheartedly. I think you're spot on with that. My concept on it was very similar to what Secretary Weaver was talking about in that, and Joe and I have discussed in that. Honestly, we want to take baby steps and try to figure this out, not jump headfirst into the pool. And so toward that objective, that's why I thought it might be useful to start out in both committees, having their relative perspectives. I don't know that the evolution on this won't be that there is yet another committee that is spawned out of some of the members or with members from both of those committees. Or it may be that literally both committees can get together periodically for a little bit larger group meeting and in effect do the same thing as if we had spun off on an individual or dedicated AI committee. So, here again, I'm open to either alternative, but I guess sort of the overarching is we've got to look at AI. Just a question of what the mechanics are going to be and how we do this.
Rocco, Tracy has her
Hey,
hand up.
Yeah, Tracy.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, and sorry to be off camera today with conflicts. Let me maybe make a gentle sort of alternative approach proposal, and that would be whether we keep DIT in the defining and strategic objective sense, and therefore use this committee as a whole, especially for something so important as generative AI, as for now, the responsible cognizant oversight group. And what we do is ask, for example, DIT to perhaps more fully articulate that strategy that Jim started to outline and identify the sub implications for the two committees. And then we could, in a organized way, because I appreciate Jim's comments about Secretary Weaver's comments that we don't want everything to just bubble up in a way that can't be followed up by DIT. So in such a scenario, DIT would be on point in the early go, defining a strategy, articulating the areas where it has issues, and it would appreciate guidance from each of the subcommittees in a particular scoped way. And then the subcommittees could go off, do that work, bring it back to this large committee, and then we could decide at a future meeting based on what we're hearing from DIT and from the two subcommittees, whether this warrants placement one way or another, keeping it with the large ITSB or spawning something separate.
Tracy, thank you. I think that's an interesting and useful perspective. Jeff, what's your opinion here?
Well, Tracy, I need a little more insight because I don't think we are pulling this AI out of DIT in any way, shape, or form. It's just, okay, what is the appropriate means for us to stay current on reviewing whatever DIT, a subcommittee of DIT, the legislature, whoever is looking at employing AI? I get a sense our first responsibility is to determine whether we have a responsibility to pay attention to it and focus on it. And then how we do that, whether it's just the full board's looking at it or whether it's a subcommittee or not. And I think what we were trying to get at is, do we elevate it so people recognize, since it is so important, that we're going to make it a designation within a committee or its own committee. So Tracy, maybe what I'm hearing is we're saying it needs to stay within the current committee structure, not necessarily create a separate one at this point. But the question is, do we recognize it within the Digital Transformation Committee or not? I guess. So I'm a little confused is really the answer. How's the best way to address this?
And just for some context.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, Keith.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tracy. I was just going to say, just for context, just for everybody's awareness, and I'll provide this as part of my update for the Cybersecurity and Privacy Committee. We are looking at the AI framework with Cherie. So that is already part of our committee work. Sorry, Tracy.
Tracy, do you have something?
Sorry. Yeah, it took a second to get off mute. Yeah, so I wasn't suggesting that neither committee ignore it. I think it is absolutely essential to both committees as part of the normal course of business. My suggestion was more that the last thing this board and DIT needs are the subcommittees to go off with a level of enthusiasm, right? That will be impossible to follow through on. And I don't say that in any kind of a negative way. I mean, but we're still working on a lot of the things that were initially identified with digital transformation, seeing great progress. I neither want to weaken those nor create sort of rabbit holes for DIT to try to run down and close. So I was simply trying to get at a way that we could have each subcommittee following up where and as needed, but not own it in one place. Keep it with this board, at least for now, in acknowledgement and recognition that this is not anything in a particular domain. It is everything in all domains. And so really is a broader umbrella. Sorry if I'm being unclear about it.
That makes sense. If I may, again, I'm going to ask a question of you, Tracy, and you, Joe. You guys are living it day to day in the real world, from the business perspective, as running IT shops as CIOs. How are you positioning organizationally AI within your shops?
I'll go ahead and answer. Jeff, what we're doing is creating an AI center of excellence. We already have a team of data scientists, but Gen AI, and this gets really confusing because people don't understand the difference between Gen AI and AI. And if you all watch the news, it's so funny. People refer to just basic automation now as AI.
Right.
Crazy. Anyway, we do have a center of excellence. And just as Secretary Weaver was saying, we've adopted kind of a conservative approach. You know, we want to be aggressive about low risk, high reward, back office things. We do have some pilots going on for the GitHub Copilot for our developers, and then the Microsoft Copilot, you know, embedded in Office 365 and also in Bing. But you all probably know there's a cost to some of that that's pretty dramatic if you spread that across the organization. So we're trying to ascertain the real value of that and then who in the company can use it. There's some speculation, however, because we did get a policy out pretty early, you know, really concerned about copyright violations, you know, hallucinations, errors, you know, all the same things that everybody's worried about. But it's likely that people have their personal computer right beside their work computer and they're using it anyway. So, and there's just an insatiable demand. So we're trying to kind of balance keeping the organization informed and excited about the possibility, but also informed and educated about the risk and taking a balanced approach to that. I do feel that we need a real center of excellence there. We are working strongly with legal and compliance and our cybersecurity folks on continually updating the policy. But I think the opportunity and reward is greater than the risk for the most part, but the risk is real. So we're taking it seriously. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where we are.
And just to real quick, I think a lot of what Joe says mirrors us, and perhaps some of my comments about how DIT might handle it, guidance to Secretary Weaver in this committee, are colored by the fact that I'm living in an environment where, because of our distributed nature at universities, everybody presumes that AI is all they need to do, or ChatGPT is all they need to do, and don't fully understand the implications, don't always coordinate those. So it may be that I, again, am channeling my world when I talk about what we might think about for DIT. As far as our world, I am also acknowledging and encouraging people to think about this, but we are being very cautious about which things we pilot and selecting those in very narrow, small ways, joined at the hip with a particular functional unit. So looking closely at areas like research administration, we've identified 30 things that we might use AI for, and are now narrowing into which one will we start with. So it's not we fix that with AI as a blanket answer. Likewise, we'll soon peel off admissions with a similar activity. But all that work, we don't have the center of excellence in the university kind of model that Joe talks about. We do have one in our health system, and we work very closely with them. most of all my work and guidance is coordinated through a body of faculty, a committee that I've established to help guide us. And these are faculty who are AI, card carrying, right? Some in research, some in how they've used it. So a little less formalized than Joe's, but still appropriately acknowledging the need to balance the opportunity with the risk, even if, as with Joe, I think it is more opportunity than risk, but there is enough risk that you got to make sure you do it right.
One last thing, if I may, Rocco, and this is kind of Secretary Weaver directed to you. You made the comment, and we've heard as well that the legislature is pondering what to do with AI, and we've heard, at least I've heard rumblings that they may be creating a separate entity to deal with it. I don't know. So any insight, but the concern I have with the legislature having been in that body is they see a potential issue, it comes to focus, it gets lots of attention, outside entities and individuals approach them with the need to address the matter, and then they do exactly the opposite of what Joe, you and Tracy are doing as organizations, which is being cautious, thoughtful to the extreme, and being, taking the proper steps to move at the right pace. We tend to, and the legislature tends to, try to solve everything with a great big hammer without anticipating unintended consequences long term. So just, Secretary Weaver, anything you suggest as a body we need to do around generative AI that doesn't conflict with the legislature, but also do we have the ability to support you and DIT and ensuring they're not taking directions and steps that make it much harder to do your job?
Okay, so I'd like to jump in here and first let's rein in the conversation and quit using the term AI, if we could, please. We're talking about generative AI. We have been doing AI since the 1950s. This state has been doing AI definitely over COVID, post-COVID. And I don't want to go back and have to replow a field that we already sowed and are reaping the benefits of. So the focus really has got to be around generative AI and what that brings. As I reflect back yesterday in our conversation we had with Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, to him, generative AI is the fourth major revolutionary shift in the IT industry. It started with the laptop, it started with the smartphone, it started with cloud, and this is now the fourth evolution, if you will, a revolution in the IT arena. And really, for the most part, you notice that we have not rushed out and did a policy, or we have policies in place today. This is another new technology that's being introduced and will be a disruptor in the workforce and things of that nature. We recognize that. But from a technology aspect, I do believe we have the parameters in place. To me, as I said earlier, the bigger issues are going to be around education, and folks understanding what is generative AI. And in essence, the simple explanation of that is now you have an orchestrator that you can talk to. You do not need to be a programmer anymore to go orchestrate artificial intelligence activities. Now you can leverage a natural language learning module and boom, which is a game changer in the sense too that you no longer need to be a 4-year college degree to do application development. If you go out, and I heard, I think Joe or Tracy mentioned GitHub. When you look at Copilot there and the integration there, I can sit there and start talking and basically start creating an application just by talking through Copilot to create some things. What this is going to lead to is, in the industry terms, the democratization of IT. And what we're going to end up having, we can't call it shadow IT anymore, but basically what it's going to do is continue to spur shadow IT. Because now you're going to have so much more power and capability at the hands of the workforce that they had not had before. I think these are the areas of concern that we're going to start having to figure out how to get around, because we all know that some of these little one-off applications end up becoming mission critical production. Nobody realizes it until it's not there anymore. It's not going to be accounted for in disaster recovery plans, continuity planning, those kind of issues. And that's the part that truly scares me as we move forward. It's not necessarily the tech itself. I think there are some things we're going to have to account for in that process. And so my conversation so far with a legislative member who has been in the RTP area, pulling together a number of institutions, both higher ed, private sector, things of that nature. I reminded him that, at the state, this is kind of what we're doing. But respectfully, I don't have authority over critical infrastructure, and I have authority over private sector. The legislature can influence that. But what we got to be careful about is as the General Assembly starts doing legislative stuff, there's going to be a trickle down, and it's going to have unintended consequences on the work that we're trying to do here at the state government level. And so, at least at the moment, there's a commitment that both myself and Cherie will get included into those ongoing work group sessions that he is hosting. And again, I think the big thing here is we have to do education. We're looking at pulling together training material to educate the state workforce on, what are these concepts? What does this really mean? And why you have to be aware of some of this stuff. And so we don't want to sit there and necessarily become a bottleneck. Like I said, we've been focused on enabling a path forward. We are government. We have to take a risk management approach to this because of the nature of the data that we have, and the trust or maybe lack of trust that maybe exists sometimes with government. But we have to make sure we're doing our due diligence. I can tell you that from a higher ed aspect, we've gotten some pressure that we're not moving fast enough. And I'm sorry, we are government. We're gonna continue with a risk-based approach. To make sure that we're doing the right things in the right manner to secure and get to the best possible outcomes as we can. So I know I kind of rambled there a little bit, but AI is a broad term. It's like saying cloud. It means a lot of things, and I really think the concern here is around generative AI and the power that will bring because of the language models that are now available, and how do we put governance around that? As an example, if someone creates a Microsoft, had said in their world, if someone goes out to GitHub or Power BI, creates something, and it's used by more than 20 people, that when the 21st person tries to get on it, they can't access it. It's like a governing plate, if you will, if you want to use a NASCAR, a restrictor plate. That way it doesn't allow for the proliferation, and then there's got to be an architecture review and an approval process for that to continue to move forward. So there are things that we can do. We're just not, as a body yet, prepared to do that because we don't really know yet what is that tidal wave going to look like, that tsunami wave, and do we have our resources appropriately positioned to be able to account for that?
Yeah. So in effect, building circuit breakers into the system.
In some cases, yes. So we don't want to throttle innovation, but at the same time, we don't want something to go rogue, and then what happens when that happens. Yeah.
Patrick, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you very much. I think the outstanding conversation, I believe we're all hitting on the same point here. First and foremost, this is a priority. So no ifs, ands, or buts. I think we all agree that this is one of our top priorities. To follow on with Secretary Weaver and Tracy and Keith, from the community college perspective, we take the approach of trying to decompose a very complex concept. And what I've heard and what I'm encouraged by, because we're tracking the same way with community colleges, risk, right? What is that risk perspective? And that's what my information security officer team is focused on, is protecting state assets and community college assets and data, and preventing something horrible from happening, right? Putting those barriers and controls in place. But then taking the use case perspective. What are the needs or the use cases that each one of our functional areas could possibly leverage AI? And I think to some of Secretary Weaver's point there, what are the different utilities that are available and which ones should we use? I often use the obvious item of TikTok, right? I think everybody understands at its base what the perception was. Our data was uncontrolled. It was held, TikTok data was held outside of the United States, and that presents an obvious challenge to us. So how do we create that AI portfolio, right? And from the community college, I can tell you from the community college president's perspective, there is concern, right, on a community college campus with students. I think we've heard plagiarism and the whole gamut there on how students can kind of game the system or leverage AI to make their life a lot easier. I also remind our community colleges that there is that concept of an honor code, right? So that gets into ethical use. So I think we've got all the right topics here. And I think more to Tracy's point is how do we leverage this body to be able to fill in those blanks under each one of those headers that we've identified? I'm incredibly encouraged, but this also gets to the point of trying to, that old quote of boiling the ocean. I think we have to start somewhere, put a pin in it, and then see how this body can come together to put pen to paper. So that's a little bit about the community college perspective, but also the magnitude of this concept of AI. And I really appreciate Secretary Weaver there. It is the fourth generation. It is the next generation. This is new and exciting, but it's also not, right? So we've been doing this for some time. So that's a couple of words here from the community college side of the shop.
Gerald, you had your hand up a minute ago. Do you still have a comment to make? You're muted, Gerald. There you go.
Actually, at the time, Joe had just mentioned the Center of Excellence, was it, Joe, for AI? And at the time, I was just trying to clarify whether you were suggesting that we create some committee to do that, or I know you said incorporated into the IT strategy board. So I was just trying to clarify exactly what you meant about how Center of Excellence would be applied to what we're doing.
Was that question to me, Gerald?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
I was not trying to correlate between what we're doing in my company necessarily with the board. I was just given a overview of how we're tackling this. Somebody mentioned earlier, we have to think about our role versus Secretary Weaver's role, and ours in terms of maybe helping at the high level, strategic level, but not, informing standards and guidelines and specifics. And we got to find that balance and figure out how we can be helpful. But I think Rocco's point is it's big enough that it should be considered, as part of what we do, I think.
I would agree with that.
Okay. So at this point, we've sort of, I guess, to kind of boil this down, we have under consideration whether we look at generative AI in both committees. We spawn yet another committee, or what we take another approach, and what Tracy had recommended is sort of understand where DIT, where Secretary Weaver and DIT is with it now, follow it in both committees. Although maybe we're not really ready yet, there's just not enough good data or information for us to make a decision about how to proceed definitively in one direction or another. And, this is, for us, we're sort of in the infancy of this. And I understand Tracy's perspective on this. And I think it's probably useful to have both committees look at this. I don't know that I necessarily feel like we need to assign it to either one yet, but that we continue to do this in both committees. And as it evolves, perhaps it becomes a little clearer to us about where it needs to end up ultimately. Tina?
Yeah, the one thing I will tell y'all is this isn't going away, and it's actually going to get a little faster on steroids.
Sure.
And there's going to be some things coming in the market that if we do not get ahead of it and we aren't talking about it now and have a propensity for action, we will be left behind, and we will be not only left behind from a state perspective, we will be left behind from every perspective. I can't tell you much more, but I can tell you as I sit in Google and I run AI, if you don't have the propensity to act now, you will be left behind. And that's the last thing we want to be perceived as someone who didn't look and embrace it, or at least figure out how we can utilize it for good. So it's coming, whether it's in the medical field, it's coming, whether it's in the manufacturing field and every other field we have. And so I think we need to get slightly ahead of it instead of be left behind.
Yeah, appreciate that perspective. I obviously agree wholeheartedly. Obviously, that's the basis of the discussion we're having now. We need to get involved here as quickly and get ourselves up to speed as quickly as we can, and then make whatever contributions we can to help Jim with his missions here. Julie, you have hand up?
Rocco, I just wanted to clarify. So both committees would discuss sort of how it relates to their committee. I think I heard Tracy also suggesting the full board should have conversations. So should we plan on that being a agenda topic at the next full board meeting?
Oh, I assume it's going to be, whether we make that now or as things evolve, but certainly this will be a continuing topic for us.
Great, thank you.
So, well, folks, to sort of bring this sort of full circle into closure, do we have any real opposition to having both boards look at this, or both subcommittees involved in looking at this? And maybe Joe and Keith, you folks put your heads together, figure out where there's some, common ground that we need to work together on, and then somewhat individually. And then perhaps what we need to do is have another meeting just between subcommittees, or even another meeting with the whole board, and not in a 3-month time frame, but a little sooner than that, just to track how we're evolving on this, or at least to develop a perspective of how to move forward. Certainly want Secretary Weaver's input on this and all of his staff. And so maybe what the takeaway is, both committees look at this, Joe and Keith, and if you will work with Secretary Weaver and his staff to try to develop as much information and for us to be able to look at an overarching strategy before the next meetings.
I think we can do that.
Yeah, and Rocco, as I mentioned, we're already looking when working with Cherie. Cherie's been doing a fantastic job from the privacy side with AI, and sharing with the committee the AI framework. So we'll just continue down our path as a committee.
Okay. So I guess our consensus is, and obviously, and back to Jeff's thing, should we be looking at this? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, everybody agrees that this is front and center, and certainly something that a strategy board should undertake to look at. And so I think we're all in agreement that that's how we're going to proceed. Joe and Keith, each of you will look at it from a little different perspective, but try to bring our relative perspectives together for additional dialogue here in the next couple of weeks, months, continuing to work with the Secretary and his staff on this. Are we all in agreement on this?
Yes.
I see heads nodding. Okay. All right. Okay. So that being said, Keith, can you give us a little bit of an update on your committee?
Sure, have to. And my apologies for being off camera. I am in transition, both from a job front as well as a laptop front. So I'm on my cell phone in the middle of the woods. So we've had 2 meetings since our last full board meeting. One more specifically around cybersecurity, the one in February more prioritizing the privacy side. And I would invite, as I am trying to do this on my cell phone, Tori and or Cherie to weigh in on any of my updates. From the cybersecurity side, a few updates. Looking at combined contracts. Tori shared that they're still on track to have a combined cybersecurity services and tools contract RFP out by latter part of April. We're hoping that this will help simplify the ability for all the state agencies to obtain cybersecurity services and tools. Next, he shared the SLCGP grants. And if you need to know what that stands for, please ask Tori. We're almost through the initial recommendations for the grants program for the 23 submissions. Scoring from those has been completed, and the next steps will be for the emergency management director and Tori to review and determine what the final ask will be. Next, quite a bit of discussion about the Joint Cybersecurity Task Force. Obviously, great partners for us, but they remain vigilant, engaged in incident response activities. Thankfully, we have been relatively quiet in the last few months, unless something's changed since the last reporting. I know Tori has a particular focus on incident response capability improvements. He's working on procuring some additional incident response capabilities, specifically equipment to assist with the recovery process, such as temporary server equipment to allow affected entities to rebuild servers in a clean environment, while the actual incident response is ongoing. Next, he had shared as a part of the Joint Cyber Task Force the election cybersecurity support. The JCTF has been engaged in supporting the State Board of Elections for monitoring cybersecurity threats during the primary. So a lot of cyber and IT hygiene items that were provided, but no significant issues came up. Lastly, he shared the NIST CSF 2.0 release. They're in the process of reviewing the latest NIST release of the cybersecurity framework, which moves the framework to the version 2.0, and they're looking for that expected guidance to be in line with the version 2.0 in the future. And this will likely include updates with privacy and AI frameworks that Cherie's been working on as well. So that was January. So let me pause there for a second, if I could, Rocco, and invite Tori to weigh in and ask if I missed anything.
No, thanks, Keith, and thanks everybody, and apologize for no camera. Also traveling at a cyber exercise planning conference. So yeah, Keith, thank you much. Those were the major updates, and nothing really missed there. The only extra thing that I can think to add that had just come up in my review on things is looking at the apprenticeship program. We're making some changes there to where ESRMO will be a lot more involved in the actual administration of that program as a shared state resource. We've had it in doing some research on that. There was some discussions around why the structure was set up the way that it is, and so on. And so we had it where typically an apprentice would come in and really be exclusively focused on and assigned to an agency through the course of their entire apprenticeship. And there are benefits in doing that to some extent, where you get that consistency at the apprenticeship level and so on. But there's also some challenges with that when it comes to the shared resource nature of the apprenticeship program and other projects that they could get exposed to, have an opportunity to work on, and so on. So we're basically changing the program slightly. The on-the-ground activities the apprentices are engaged in, and the support that the agencies that are involved in that program today, we're not anticipating them seeing any impact to what they're doing, but rather where those apprentices now can also hopefully work on additional side projects and maybe with other agencies to get that further exposure. That would be the only other thing that I could think for an update there. So pending questions. Thanks, Keith, and back to you.
Thanks, Tori. Like I mentioned, we moved into privacy for our February meeting. So Cherie was able to provide us an update on privacy. So I know she is bringing on 5 positions, all receipt-based positions. And I know she's hoping to have that recurring funding in the future. But a bulk of the discussion, not to belabor the AI discussion from earlier, but bulk of the discussion was around the AI framework. Cherie had shared that she had met with CIOs back in October to review the AI framework, invited feedback. They're having sessions, I believe this past February, to receive further comments. And I believe Cherie was working to create some type of AI working group to include the people in government, risk management, and et cetera, et cetera. The next area she covered around the AI framework was the privacy threshold analysis template, of which is being updated so that the language includes the AI language. And she mentioned that the privacy impact assessment is needed as well. So, Cherie, again, I'll pause there if you have any further updates on the privacy side.
Sure, thank you. So we sent out an offer and it was accepted for a deputy. I'm super excited. She'll be joining us April the 15th. She comes from Booz, but has been contracting for several years at the DoD. So she brings AI experience, data inventory experience, privacy. She was my second in the privacy program there. And helped me to create the PTA that we have now, that is the data that the data division is using. We are also getting ready to hire somebody to do more operational privacy, so that's going well. The PTA has rolled out. It has at least 2 questions that hit on AI that allow us to have a better understanding of that. And I'm also looking to add a few more positions, as mentioned, along that same line. Part of what we're doing with the AI, with the AI framework update, is that some of the feedback that we got was that folks wanted to be able to understand how to do assessments for AI. And while I have been actively waiting for NIST to give us more guidance than what we have, part of what we've realized in looking at the framework and the feedback is that even though we've mentioned that the NIST AI RMF is what should guide us, that it is helpful to have the core aspects of it. So the AI framework the appendix is being updated to add the core elements of map, measure, manage, and govern, to give people an idea about that. The PIA is being updated. And then yesterday we were talking with Microsoft about doing a PIA on all the different instances of Copilot that we'll have. So we can not only get that done by the summer when it's ready for release, but also be able to use that as a guide for others and how to answer and respond to a PIA, particularly as it relates to AI and embedded AI. So I think that's all from the privacy side.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cherie. Rocco, that concludes our committee report.
Okay.
Keith or Rocco, I'm sorry. I just want to add one of the things in talking with Microsoft General Counsel, and Cherie will love this, is someone had asked a hypothetical question. If you're looking to do AI, what's the first thing you should do? And unequivocally, the response was your state needs a privacy bill.
Yep.
Okay.
And 17 states, red states, blue states have privacy bills. I will also tell you that more and more, and Jonathan's starting to encounter this as well, and with these companies that have a global presence, GDPR is a real thing, and GDPR is referenced quite often and is something that we as the sovereign state of North Carolina cannot accept, and it's putting us into some quandaries on legal discussions as well. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but these are to Tracy's comment earlier. There's a lot of rabbit holes we're going to have to go down.
Yeah.
Try to avoid. Yeah. Well, okay. Appreciate that, Keith. Cherie, don't go anywhere because you're up next. And I guess we're going back into artificial intelligence framework update.
Okay, sure. So we reviewed the comments. Mostly they were, well, one, there weren't a whole bunch of them. lot of them went to, can you clarify this, or how can we carry out such a thing? Because it's a framework and it's at a high level, what we were getting was the request for more specific guidance, and I can understand that. So what we did was look to update and clarify certain bits of the language. One of the comments that came from the university was that the focus of the framework was on risk management. That's true. That is the lens that I understand best. But there is some merit to the framework being improved by having some language to address the fact that we are trying to empower the workforce with the use of innovation within a risk mindset. So one of the updates that's still being tweaked now is another principle that will go to empowering the workforce and how the use of AI would do such and has done. Then I mentioned adding the core for AI into the appendix. Then we're looking at, so the city of San Jose has come out with a sort of a model where they're encouraging innovation and business leaders to come in by offering their services to review how good an AI product is in order to get them in. So it's not necessarily something we're going to add into the framework, but that's something that needs to be looked at. I just heard about yesterday before we finish up the framework to see if there are any tidbits that could be useful. Indiana was the one who gave us the idea for actually putting the RMF core pieces in. That's what they have come out with for their standard, and that's been well received. But at the same time, ours isn't designed to tweak it that way. They have a whole division that does the reviews there. But it made me realize that having that sort of closer look to be able to give people identifiable aspects of what they should be looking at as they do assessment would be helpful. We still need to review the chart of the generative AI that's in the appendix to make sure that if any possible updates are needed. I talked about the innovation. We are working on the acceptable use policy and rules of behavior. There's also a model for one that goes specifically to Gen AI. I am working with the secretary on that to see whether that makes sense for us. I've talked about doing the Microsoft PIA for Copilot. And then, so we also are looking at and have started work on AI training. We've gotten some good information to get that started. And that is the other piece that we are doing. And I think that covers the updates for the framework at this time. So if I can answer any questions, I'm happy to do so.
So Chair, you're going to you have something that at some point you will have ready for prime time and publish, and are you able to share that with us?
So I still got it in Redline at the moment, and I still have those things to update, but once we have done those updates, we will definitely be ready to share it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Rocco, before once she gets those updates done, I had the due diligence sitting down with the governor's office and reviewing this as well. So
sure,
just understand there's that necessary step in there.
Oh yeah, and honestly, that was why I was asking, was this something that could be shared with us eventually? So, okay. Okay, Jerry, appreciate that update. Moving along, we have discussed creation of another committee. Jeff, I'm going to have you jump in with me on this. And at this point, I think we're talking about setting up a finance committee just to be able to review and understand where resources are and how they're being expended. Jeff, you coming on with us here? You'll need to.
I'm just sitting here taking notes.
Okay.
You know, it's again something that I've been asked at least, and a few other people, I think, and then we came back, Rocco, that talking about is, are we paying attention to the budget, the spend, and is there a way that we can, as a committee, and the reverse side of that is how do we advocate for DIT and to a lesser extent, some of the other IT operations in the agencies. And I think this last session coming up is potentially a good example where DIT got no budget expansion or no budget increase and is looking now to have to go back and ask again. So the question is, would some degree of focus on this help alleviate that as an issue and problem where we can advocate for DIT at the legislature for getting better increased appropriations on specific tasks? That was really it.
Yeah. So Jeff, I think to your point, obviously, if we are more familiar with some of this information, it just puts us as committee members in a better stead to be able to reach out to legislature and some of the folks that we might be able to have discussion with to help bring some focus to this for some of the work that Jim is trying to get done. And so I think there'll be value and benefit in that part as well. So
and the other side of this, Rocco, just to make a point, is we looked at other advisory boards, some that have more decision making and around other agencies, and this tends to be, you know, a focal area that almost all the other committees have, whether that be NCDOT as an advisory board, you know, and you can go down the list. We looked at a number of them. It just seems like most oversight. Not oversight's the wrong term because we're not an oversight board per se. We're not sitting here great. We're an advocacy board, a strategy board, and part of that has got to be, you would think, and deal with the finances and appropriations. That was it.
Basically, to be able to understand so we can advocate for. Yeah.
Yeah, and the only question is, do we have the resources to do that? Are we working on so many things? Now, the other thing that we haven't really talked about, which is within our purview as per the charter, is to add members on particularly committees. We have the authority to create committees. Obviously, we have the authority to actually appoint and bring in other resources to those committees. They don't have to be committee members that are appointed. They won't have votes and they won't sit on the full board, but they can work on any committees or subcommittees that we create, which is another thing for us to think about as we go forward. Where and when should we pull in outside expertise to help us get detailed work done for the benefit of DIT?
Sure. Subject matter experts that we would bring in.
Could be.
Okay. Yeah. So do we want to come to consensus, do a vote to establish this committee? And then I think what we're going to need to do is take nominations for someone to chair that and see if there are folks that would want to participate on that as well.
And Rocco, let me throw this out. I'm going to kind of follow Tracy's line of thought when we talked about Gen AI. Is this something we need further discussion on rather than just creating out of the blue? I don't know if the whole committee's had a chance to chew on this, know whether this is a good idea, bad idea, getting some guidance from the secretary and others. So before we just go creating something.
Yeah, and if I could chime in there, Jeff, thank you for that, because I have there's concerns I have as I was listening to the conversation. So I think it would be helpful if we had a charter or something like that that kind of laid out what this committee would be focused on, what are the expectations, because should this move forward, there's going to be it's not just my team. I'm looking at Director Walker here on the screen as well. OSBM is going to have a lot of involvement in this as well. And I'm just not prepared. It's the first I'm hearing of this to actually render a decision or anything along those lines. So I would prefer to at least maybe, now I'm aware that you all are thinking about this, it would be, I think, beneficial if Director Walker, myself, and maybe some others had an opportunity to digest what it is you all are looking at. Again, having been in a state that did TBM, I know the value of what you're talking about and have seen it. I'm just not sure that how North Carolina is structured lines itself to being able to do TBM processes in that type of manner. And it's also going to have to also be a discipline process as well of how we look at things being funded. When you start looking at total cost of ownership, a lot of times state employees are not considered project expenses, but they should be. But they're considered an embedded cost, and therefore they're not included. So if a project's sitting idle, you still have a runtime of expenses. So there's a whole discipline here that I think we need to get to as well. So I would just ask if we could we maybe have a follow-up discussion, get a charter created so we have a good understanding of what this looks like. And I'll defer to Kristen there if she wants to add any comments or anything.
No, thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think sort of seeing a few, I don't know if it's a full-blown charter or just a, a short one pager on sort of what the objectives or what that committee would hope to achieve would be useful.
And I can tell you, we've looked at, and again, I've been in a state where we leveraged Aptio fully. And it's amazing once you're doing the discipline, it's amazing what you get out of it. But the state of Washington took time to get into that discipline. And then we were able to generate those types of numbers and be able to actually show actual project costs, spend across the different domains, if you will, of information technology, et cetera. And then you also got to remember too, in the course of this, we have agencies that have been granted exemptions by the General Assembly that don't necessarily need to play by the rules. I'll say it that way. So then just understand that we will not have a complete picture. We'll have a partial picture.
Okay. And then at least understand where the exceptions are. Yeah. Okay. Jim, I certainly don't take issue with that. I think that's a very reasonable approach, not unlike what we're talking about and some of the other that, we sort of establish what we're going to want to look at or how we're going to do that. I think the other side of that is, as we get into it, we'll probably identify other aspects of that we'll want to also evaluate or get a little more information on. But in general, the point of this, the overarching point of this, is to be able to help ultimately advocate for whatever resources that DIT needs. And to be able to do that, we just need to have a little bit more understanding of it.
Well, I think if we're doing this, it's more than DIT, and I think that's where you may meet some resistance. Or to use your circuit panel analogy, sir.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And certainly it does go beyond DIT. This IT cost, spend, utilization, it's pervasive across all aspects of NC government. So, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe if we're talking, you can structure it into maybe a phase one effort might look at, I'll use the term sanction IT projects. Or chunk it up like that. So these are processes that everybody has to do. Maybe there's value in instead of looking at the whole picture, let's start looking at phases of this and do the building blocks as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's that's going to be inherent in some of the process as we do this, just to understand that part and then figure out how to put this together or put the blocks together. Understand. Okay, so I think the takeaway on this is we're going to do a little bit more work on an executive summary of what that committee would be looking to do and achieve, and sort of the areas it would begin to look at. Jeff, with your background in legislature and IT and sort of understanding a lot of this, I think that you are probably our best guy or person to begin to look at this and help us formulate some of that in conjunction with the secretary.
Well, I'm happy to help. I think it's maybe, for lack of a better term, it's a small work group within us, and then working directly under the guidance of Jim and Kristen of how we do this. And again, what I was going back to is Tracy's philosophy. These are areas we kind of need to walk slowly so we don't position ourselves into unintended consequences, and that we are a benefit and a help rather than a hindrance and a barrier going forward, which we should never be. And But we've got kind of two initiatives. One is the finance side because we're struggling getting appropriations to the full extent that we need to. And I don't know why, but that's always been the case for the last 20 years. IT just is the stepsister within the legislature. Only group that gets less attention and love is the judiciary branch, it seems like. But the other is, and I'll go back to Tina's comment, is that Gen AI, and I'll try to always refer to it as Gen AI rather than just generically AI, Mr. Secretary, is that Gen AI is a northbound train, kind of taking and paraphrasing Tina's comment, and that it's either we get on now or the train's leaving without us. So we need to figure out when and how now that the role, at least our strategy board needs to play within that segment. And again, picking up on Keith's comment, you're not going to remove Gen AI from cybersecurity committee. I mean, it's always going to be top of mind and an issue now. So the question is, what's the proper alignment? What's the proper focus? And it seems like it's an interesting that you brought up GDVRP, because that's been obviously in Europe and everything for such a long time. I don't know the barriers that exist within North Carolina versus the other states. We're looking at, components of the what privacy statutes need to be in place at a bare minimum to support Cherie and your guys' efforts that don't create boundaries, if you will, or barriers. And the last piece, how do we focus? Because I think Joe and Tracy and Eve and Patrick, you guys have said, focus more on back office, stay functional, and as our initial, and stay internal as our initial focus, rather than trying to address Gen AI from a user citizen perspective. So those give us some framework and bounds to define this, but this is something I'm not going to do I'm not able to do by myself. We need a broader set of perspectives. And so again, I was going to lean on other board members, but also Kristen and Jim, who within your organizations need to be part of helping craft this, to keep us from going off on left field, on going down a great big rabbit hole that we can't climb back out of. So I'm happy to help, happy to guide, but this is something we need to think about. I would love to see maybe informally, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to create some big to do about it, but we need a small work group to focus on this collectively and collaboratively, I think, unless somebody's got a different opinion.
Rocco, Tracy has her hand up.
Tracy.
Yeah, and just to add, yep, thanks. Not a different opinion at all, Jeff. And before I give my comment, I will +1 the notion of AI, generative AI, as a speeding locomotive headed at all of us, and not in any way to suggest in my earlier comments that we shouldn't do something with it. Just the care and prudence. On this topic, I wonder if we think the primary goal of having the finance committee, so to speak, is to help advocate on behalf of DIT. This is something we've touched on in some ways in digital transformation over the last couple of years, and that is this notion of how can we help? What can we do as the broader board or the DT subcommittee to help advocate to legislators, to anyone else, about the importance of digital transformation? So I wonder if in calling it, casting it as a finance committee, that would set certain expectations, right, or perceptions from people. Here's the group that's going to be the auditors, so to speak, looking and seeing what it is they're spending and trying to say, no, you shouldn't spend on that, you should spend on this. But rather, if we thought of this as an advocacy group somehow, for which an understanding of the finance is one of the important components, as well as an understanding of the strategies in digital transformation, cybersecurity, AI, all these areas, it would cast it perhaps in a different way. Sorry again for a semi-left field, right, suggestion, Rocco, to where you had a real clear plan, but I'm just wondering if it is a finance group or it is something else. Finance is the necessary means to the end of the advocacy for more funding, and so figuring out what its scope is, as we said earlier, and what we call it would be useful, but it could be broader than finance.
Tracy, I appreciate that perspective and that comment, because truth be told, I had a conversation with Jeff as recently as yesterday saying, we really want to call this a finance committee because I feel like that does put it in a different light. And so I'm open to what this committee name would be. And certainly finance or understanding of the mechanics of the finance relative to DIT, and actually also state spend, is fundamental to what we're talking about here, to be able to advocate for it. I also agree. I don't know that calling it the Finance Committee is necessarily the best moniker for this. I'm certainly open to another suggestion on that.
About budget advocacy, because, again, it's this particular or this last term, I had a lot of legislators asking me questions about the DIT budget, to which I wasn't privy and had no information. And I really think I could have helped DIT get some of the money they wanted had I knew more about what they were wanting to spend and where they were wanting to spend it. So, and again, advocating for DIT, but it's hard to advocate if you don't know what's going on. So I would suggest a budget advocacy group.
Gerald, I appreciate that. I certainly understand what you're talking about. I was in a similar situation with a number of legislators that I talk with as well. So I think we're sort of on the same page with this. It's just a matter of, how we're going to put this together. And I think bears a little bit more consideration. We'll see if we can craft the executive summary and then see if we can come up with the appropriate name. But I do like the concept of having advocacy in the title there. Any other comments related to this, folks? Anybody have something that they'd like to? Kristen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to, some of you may not be aware, and some of you are probably painfully aware, but DIT, right, is a cabinet agency under the governor. And as such, cabinet agencies, of which there's 3 of us who were appointed to this committee, really are bound to advocate for what is in the governor's budget. So just know that there's going to be some restrictions on what DIT as a cabinet agency can really go forward with. And I'm not sure a whole committee is necessarily needed just to advocate. I mean, I think there's some timing that could be worked out in terms of DIT just sharing with this committee what specifically for their budget, as well as other large IT projects in the state, are there before the General Assembly goes back into session, but after the governor puts out his or her budget. So I think I just would caution people to be aware of that DIT is, and myself and Secretary Cashwell, DOA Secretary, going to be a little bit, it's not necessarily to try to be opaque, but also just know that there's some sort of institutional bounds on what the 3 of us as members of this committee can do, and could potentially, I, for example, probably wouldn't be comfortable saying that I'm advocating for this when I represent all of the governor's budget. So that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Kristen, noted. Appreciate that comment. Okay. Well, sounds like we've identified a few areas to work on in the coming weeks and months, folks. Moving along on our schedule at this point, we are now open to discuss any other business that any other members might want to bring before the board. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about? I see a lot of folks muted, but no one speaking up on any other topic. That being the case, do we have maybe have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. So I'd like everybody to know that we've done this in an hour and a half today, as opposed to 3 hours. So we're giving everybody back a little bit of their Friday morning or afternoon. So Appreciate everybody attending today and some of the conversations that we've had. I appreciate everyone's perspective. Look forward to getting together again. I guess we probably have a date already established as a formal date. Given what we have going on, I don't know that we won't also look to come together before then, just to have another little pickup session. That may be a little bit more impromptu, and it may involve everybody or not, just depending on how folks are, where they are at a given time. But obviously, we got a number of things we want to continue to flesh out over the next couple of weeks and months. Thank you, everybody, for your time this morning. Thank you, Secretary Weaver.
Have a good day, everybody.
Everybody have a great
Bye.
weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.